spent my first 18 years in the center of the known world. This was actually made possible by my elementary school teacher, who instead of teaching me the countries of the world, or even perhaps the states of the United States, we were instead taught the counties of California. And we had to memorize the counties of California. So this is all I knew. This was really my universe. And I grew up in San Jose, and you know, the weather there is great. I realize that now, but at the time I completely took it for granted. I thought, you know, there are places in the world where it snows a little bit. Well, that's great. People can go skiing. But I had no idea that the weather was any different. I was over at my friend's house one day, and he said, you know, there's this great engineering school, best in the world. It's called MIT. Then he turned to me and said, but you could never get accepted there. He said, you can't do that. And that's all it took. I said, oh, yeah? And that was ignition. The funny thing was, of course, I had no idea where Massachusetts was. I applied, being very lazy. I only applied to MIT, which was a silly thing to do. So I was very fortunate to get in. I had never been on a plane before. I leave my family. No one from my family, as far as I know, had spent any real time on the East Coast. And I end up and I land there, and this is what I see. And I knew I had landed on another planet. You know, it's like, what is going on here? These buildings are really weird. What is that thing with the, you know, can opener on top of it? Turns out that's the MIT chapel. The previous one was the theater. And, you know, over the years I sort of started to get used to those buildings. They're a little bit unique. But then somebody comes along and builds this thing. And, boy, I got to tell you, I hated it at first. Over time, it grew on me. It leaks like a sieve. They had some real problems with the roof there. Hope nobody in here designed this building. But, you know, and then I think they just went a little too far. So this is on my alma mater's campus as well, which I haven't quite gotten used to this one yet. Now, this is called Simmons Dormitory. And I was talking to an architecture friend of mine back in Boston. He said, oh, you better be careful. That's the most advanced architectural building in the world. And I said, well, you know, it does look kind of cool at night. So I'll give it that. But the thing I appreciate about these buildings is they really broke a lot of rules. People said you can't do it that way. And they said, oh, yeah? And they tried something. They did it. I've got a friend of mine who says, just do something. Do something. Make a difference. And, you know, MIT is a perfect place for it. This is where we experiment. We try new things that have never been done before. Of course, who can deny the beauty and classic architecture of the MIT Great Dome? Absolutely beautiful. This is one of the sites I saw my first day there wandering around campus. But, of course, breaking the rules at MIT is part of the culture, and so we figure out ways to deface beautiful things. This was actually one of the earliest hacks. I think back in the 30s. I'm sure it was the architecture department, almost certain of that. And of course, after this happened, the university said, you can't do that. Safety hazards, etc., you know. Well, you can imagine how the MIT student body responded to that. And it goes on and on and on. This was the music department, of course. Aeroastro decided to get into the game and put a lunar lander on top of the dome. Of course, the police car and the fire truck. And you can see it's not easy to get up there. Multiple locked doors you have to go through. They actually have security guards, so it's pretty amazing they do this. And you see this guy had to climb up. How did they get that up there? A lot of creativity. And, of course, the MIT subway, and that's supposed to be R2-D2. So eventually the preschool on campus, the daycare, got into the act as well and built a snowman up there. So that's a little bit of the culture I came from in terms of my education. When I graduated from MIT, I had this vision, actually, since I was 13, about building a company that did things a bit differently. And Of course, the very first thing I was told is you can't do that. I wanted to build a company that was not only doing great, exciting things and profitable and making a difference in the world, but was also ethical and socially responsible. And I got a lot of pushback. You know, we were starting this company in the late 90s, dot-com, tech boom. I realized if I was going to do what I wanted to do, I couldn't do it with outside investors. It just doesn't work. They expect, you know, a big return on investment very quickly. I had a lot of friends that went that direction. We wanted to found a company, and here's what we've done. The idea was we wanted to make a company founded on the idea that people really matter and that businesses can be profitable, ethical, and socially responsible. So our company motto is better technology, better world. And that's really the yardstick by which we measure our success by, in addition to our profits. And you know, I've seen a lot of companies sort of put out the, you know, here's our company values and use it as a marketing tool. For us, this really is more of a standard we hold ourselves to. We actually have a company conference every quarter, and we get together and we ask ourselves the hard questions. How are we doing? How are we achieving these goals? Are we living up to the ideal of integrity? You know, and integrity is an interesting thing. I was thinking the other day, after having an interaction with an auto mechanic, and of course, as those things go, being a bit upset, feeling ripped off. And then I started to reflect, and I said to myself, you know, there's a bit of a double standard going on here. You know, we look at that auto mechanic, and we accuse him of perhaps charging us or doing things that we didn't really need. And I stop and think about all the other white-collar professions out there and how, for some reason, that's acceptable. So I think it's very, very important that we really ask ourselves these ethical questions. We really ask ourselves on a regular basis, not afraid to examine ourselves and hold ourselves to a standard that we can be proud of at the end of the day. So what does Vecna mean? I'll just get this out of the way. It's a word in Czech. It means eternal. Part of the idea behind our company was we were going to build something that was going to last. We're not going for an IPO. We're not going to be acquired and sell out. The whole idea was create a model that would be an example for the rest of the world, the rest of the corporate world to follow. So at this point, we're 10 years into our history. We have 4 very successful divisions, from consulting, our Vecna medical division, enterprise resource management of our goldmine tool, and our Vecna robotics R&D division. One of the areas I just wanted to mention briefly is we're the industry leader for patient check-in kiosks for hospitals. And in talking to my architecture friend, he mentioned how there's a real push these days in architecture to try and build the IT into the built-in structure. And if anybody's interested in talking about that afterwards, I'd be interested. And you know, we're talking about things like building things into the walls and have the touch screens and make it much more a part of, and actually it's happening now. We've got a lot of hospitals that are building new wings coming to us and say, we'd like to work with you right from the beginning to look at how we can build this technology in. At Vecna, this is where I started to learn that just because somebody says I can't do something is not sufficient reason to actually do it. Apparently for me it was a necessary condition. I just learned that it's not quite sufficient. It really also needs to feel right. And I say feel for an important reason. You can get into all kinds of debates about, you know, what is right. And I think it is important to think about those things. But at the end of the day, we've really got to trust our individual gut. What feels right? What feels right to me? And we have to give ourselves the opportunity to think about those things and get in touch with that. And then when we find something that feels right, we really have to have the courage, the confidence and courage to do it. I for a long time, I think, really lacked the leadership, even within my own company that I founded, to not defer to others with less vision. And that was a hard thing for me to learn. Lots of people saying, well, you can't do that. That's not right. That's not the way it works. Setting up all kinds of rules. You know, some of the conversation earlier today, I think, really touched on this. We've got these frameworks and we've got these constructs that we operate within. And we need to step back from that very often and say, well, why? Does that really make sense? honest? Is that something that we really should be constraining ourselves to? One such area is this idea of social responsibility. When we started the company, we had this idea that we were going to pay our employees 10% of their work week was going to be spent doing community service. You can imagine the kind of response we got from the business school on this type of thing. No way you could ever run a company that way. It isn't going to work. You wouldn't be able to be profitable. You wouldn't be able to be to survive. So, of course, I said, "Oh yeah," and we went after it. And since 1988, we've paid our employees to do 10% of spend 10% of their work week on community service. As a matter of fact, right now our CEO is over in Africa meeting with several ministers of health from a variety of countries there. We've been deploying free primary care health clinics. And she's way out in front of me on this one. I'm oftentimes trying to slow her down and telling her she can't, and of course she responds in the same way. But one of the interesting things that she educated me on was that apparently there's lots of money going to Africa for devastating diseases, things like AIDS, etc. A lot of work in malaria, but there is a real lack of just basic primary care. And so we had people who could get all the AIDS medications they needed, but they get the flu or you know, a bad stomach bug, they die quite often. They don't have the basic primary care. So she's over there working hard to solve that problem. We have been able to do this through donating a lot of our IT. One of the big things we do at Vecna is IT infrastructure for healthcare systems. So I want to talk a little bit about robotics. This was the state of the art of robotics when I got to MIT. And of course, this is what I wanted to build. And I was told I couldn't do that. Long list of reasons, because I didn't want to just build a robot that looked like that. I wanted to build a robot that was capable of doing real work, that was strong, that could actually lift things. And there's some fundamental physical problems with that. Motors weigh a lot, they're bulky, they're heavy. Well, the human body is just absolutely a phenomenal piece of machinery. I have gained an appreciation for the human body that I don't think I would have gotten had I not tried to build robots. And the interesting thing is that as I started to really dig into why I couldn't do that, I realized it was because we had built a framework around ourselves of rules that people had made decisions that perhaps had not been you know, the only way to do things. So one of the real challenges here is how can you build a robot that's about a human size but yet actually has the strength. Now they've got these humanoid robots. Japan has a lot of them that you've seen, Asmo, and some of these other robots. Well, these robots can move, but they barely have the strength to move their own weight. And I wasn't going to be satisfied with that. I wanted to build what I saw in the movies, something that not only can move and maybe even act sort of like a human, but could be superhuman and could go and lift, you know, 500 pounds. So I started to look at all the available technologies to do this, and it turned out that there was this thing called hydraulics, and we all know hydraulics from the big earth-moving equipment out there. And people said, well, yeah, but hydraulics, you can't use that. It just doesn't work. It's inefficient. It doesn't scale. And as I started to look at that, I understood why people had come to those conclusions, but I wasn't ready to accept that it wasn't possible. And so over the years, we built a series of robots that essentially have proved them wrong. This is the torso of our most recent version. It's called the Bear robot. It stands for Battlefield Extraction Assist Robot. And this robot's able to lift 500 pounds. And here you can see with the legs we put on it. And one of the real fun things about it is it's very transformer-like. It can take a lot of different forms. One of the nice things about the robots is they're sexy enough that we get a lot of media attention. So this is a CNN reporter being lifted by a robot during a live TV interview, which was kind of fun. This should have audio. Oh, I'm sorry, it is getting cut off. Let me try and play this. should have tried that out ahead of time. So one of the somewhat unfortunate things about robotics is the military is really the only one putting any money into it these days. And when we first started working on this robot, of course, we met some people, and the first question they asked was, well, how big of a gun and how many can we put on this robot? We wanted to build a robot that was going to help people, that was going to save people. And so that's what we've been focusing on. So BEAR stands for Battlefield Extraction Assist Robot, and we've been able to build this robot that's capable of going out and rescuing people from dangerous situations, a battlefield, a burning building, a collapsed building, that type of thing. And lots of challenges. One of the things that somebody mentioned earlier that I really liked was this idea of being constrained and being innovative through the constraints that you have. We have had very little money to build this so far. Now that's starting to change, thankfully now. We're getting more and more support from different organizations, but because we had so little money, we had to be very innovative in how we attacked some of the problems. And this is actually, in some sense, one of the ways in which we were able to solve some of the problems that other people hadn't been able to solve before, because they would go out, for instance, and buy these $5,000 piece hydraulic valves. And the $5,000 piece hydraulic valves are very, very nice, but they aren't extremely energy efficient. They don't allow you to do some of the things that, because we couldn't afford them, we kind of had to build our own. We were able to address a lot of those issues. And it's really been kind of exciting to do that. There's some of the superhuman stuff that's kind of fun. Smashing things, tearing through doors. Again, the idea here is that this robot has got to be able to... a lot of the robots that existed at the time for search and rescue were somewhat able to search, but had almost no capability to actually rescue somebody. They could take pictures. They're sort of a virtual telepresence. This is one of my favorite. The robot is balancing up on the ends of its tracks while lifting, I think it's about 200 pounds there. And finally, I achieved my ultimate goal of building a robot that can change a light bulb. Of course, that's just in animation. This robot invasion, robots are invading our society, and are we going to survive? And when I first started thinking about this talk, I started thinking about this idea of technology robbing us of experiences that we really should have. One question is, what is a robot? And I have a very liberal definition of a robot. Anybody tell me what this is? Escalator, right. This is a robot by the definition of a mechanical system that moves and has a computer controlling it, which is a pretty broad definition. The thing I hate about this robot is it makes us a bunch of lazy, fat, you know what I'm talking about. I was watching the news last night, and it said, of course, the United States spends more money than any other country on health care, yet we have the worst outcomes. And it's not because our doctors aren't good, of course. It's because we eat way too much and we exercise way too little. And my kids hate me, but I won't let them use this robot. I will not let them use this. And I live in Porter Square. If any of you have been to Boston, we take the subway all the time. Porter Square has probably the longest stairs and escalator in the world. It is very, very long. We walk up the stairs every day. I don't have to pay for a gym membership. But I see every day so many people just letting this technology rob them of the exercise that they need. Is this a robot? And are we using these tools in ways that really improves the human condition, or are we using these tools in ways that robs us of our humanity, robs us of our social interactions in the real world? I leave that as an open question. There's lots of debate about these things. I feel pretty strongly that we have to use our tools and our technology and our innovations to really work to improve the human condition, not feed our laziness, not feed our fear of interacting with people in real situations. And I don't know the answer to that. I think as designers, as we have the opportunity to build things, though, it's an important question to ask ourselves. Are we really just providing candy and chocolate, metaphorically, or are we really providing something that is going to make this world a better place? So here are the 3 words of advice I have, and then I will end. First of all is know what you really want, and put happiness there with a question. I assume that that's what you really want, but oftentimes we don't act as if that's the case. What has the research shown us? It has shown us that money and power do not provide happiness, unambiguously, does not provide happiness. But that seems to often be what we're spending all of our time and effort to achieve. I believe, it's my hypothesis, that our happiness is going to correspond to the good that we do in the world. So I think that it's important that we really dream big. We can't let others limit our vision with the "you can't do that." And it's just clear that there are all kinds of people who had no particular genius or talent, other than the fact that they were going to try. Everybody else be damned, they were going to try. And so the key there is working hard. There's a great quote which says, "Persistence alone is omnipotent." All the other things are kind of nice. If you happen to be really smart, if you happen to have money, if you happen to have all these other advantages, but persistence is what it takes. Persistence is what it takes to be successful and to really have an impact in the world. I just love mentioning this. My son thinks he's a superhero. And the other day he asked me to find him some real bad guys to fight. He's convinced that he has these powers, but they just haven't come out because he hasn't actually encountered a real bad guy yet. So he has rainbow powers that turn bad guys into flowers. And the real interesting one is he can shoot noodles out of his eyes to feed people, which is an interesting mental picture. But I think it's important to encourage this. You're all superheroes. The power you have to impact the world in significant ways is huge. We have to remember to always use our powers for good, never evil. And that means taking care of people that need help. We all have been tremendously fortunate. I was speaking at MIT the other day at an entrepreneur conference, and there was a bit of an ego sense there that was kind of troubling me, because there are a lot of people with really the sense that I worked hard, I earned this, I deserve it, I'm super smart. And I just felt a responsibility to remind them. I said, look, you had nothing to do with the brain that ended up in your body. You had nothing to do with being born into a country where you could get the kind of education you got. So, it's really, really kind of silly to take that as something that you have earned. Because we haven't earned it, we have a responsibility to give back to the world, to leave it better than we found it. And so, we need to embrace the necessity of breaking the rules. When people say you can't do something, this is where innovation occurs. If it feels right, you've got to follow your gut. We need to take into account physical, intellectual, and social health impacts of everything we invent. And remember to use your powers for good, never evil. Thank you.